Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for our weekend edition of Hebrew Word Study. And as we've been doing, alternating every other week between the Hebrew book of Matthew and as we continue in 2 Samuel chapter 5, we're going to pick up on verse 22 today. And again, this is so incredible. And I just hope I can somehow transmit the thrill, the passion that I feel as I'm going through and um, just studying um, these verses that normally I would have just skipped over. To be honest with you, before learning Hebrew and studying the Hebrew, I would have just passed over them and they would have had so little meaning to me. But I hope you can see today that there is such a great enhancement of understanding that we're going to get from this. And to me, it all points towards a just an increased love for God, an increased um, awesomeness or awe of him and his word and what he has done and how it was recorded and here for us with just a little bit of digging to get just such a deeper understanding of it. So with that preface, let's jump right in here. I'm going to first look at the Blue Letter Bible and we'll read these couple verses. We're just going to finish out the chapter, verse 21 through 25. I'm sorry, 22 through 25. Um, and the Philistines came up again and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord. And of course, you see that Lord is capitalized, signifying that it's the Tetragrammaton Yud-He-Vav-He, or Yahweh, as we think was maybe pronounced. And the Lord replies to him, saying, "No, you should not go up, but fetch a compass behind them." We're reading King James English here, translation, "and come upon them over against the mulberry trees." And then he continues, and let it be when you hear the sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then you shall bestir yourself, for then the Lord, again, capital Lord, will go out before you to smite the host of the Philistines. And then the conclusion of it is, yep, David did so as the Lord commanded him, smote the Philistines from Geba until thou come to Gazer. Again, incredible story here of a battle, and there was just a few things that jumped out to me that I want to show you. First of all, David inquired of the Lord. And this is quite a lengthy answer. Many times when there are inquiries made, we just get a yes or no. Um, but here, David got quite an answer. So with that, we say, okay, how did this occur? How did God speak to David? And maybe you come up with some other options, but I came up with three ways, at least in my understanding, that God could have spoke uh, in this many words to David. This wasn't using the Urim and Thummim because that is normally just a yes or no answer. Um, he could have spoke inwardly to David's heart. That we can all agree on. I think that's probably the most acceptable answer for all of us because it doesn't take a lot to go outside your comfort zone of belief for that God spoke to David's heart. Um, Option two, God spoke verbally to David's ears, that he physically heard the words of God speaking to him. Uh, again, still well within the realm of how, we could believe God could speak to him. Or three, that God used a prophet to speak to him. So unless there's more, maybe, but it's got to be one of those three ways. So how did this all happen? And how did David know that this was God speaking to him? And with that, he put it into action as a certainty and went and acted upon it. And I think there again lies a clue as to David's character, his relationship with God, that he would be instructed in these ways and uh, and take it to heart and act upon it with just full blind faith. What we now want to do is just go and unpack some of these things. Okay, first is this is a very unusual situation. tells him what not to do, talks about mulberry trees, talks about a sound, a bestirring of the trees, talks about a smiting of the hosts, but it doesn't tell how God did it. Doesn't tell, how did David interact? What did God do to bring about the victory? And then this last part just kind of intrigues me. Look at the wording of it. It says that they smote or who someone smote the Philistines. We don't know who's speaking. We don't know who's being spoken to. We don't know who did the smiting other than David did so as the Lord commanded him. So he went and sat there. He went and bestirred himself. He went to smite. But then it says here that from Geba until thou come to Gazer. So this looks like someone's being spoken to. Who was the thou come to Gazer? Who is the one going? Who is the one coming there? So all of those are very, very interesting. And to dig in a little bit deeper, we're going to go to Bible Hub, where we can see the Hebrew and we can analyze it kind of word for word. And so what we're looking for is just, okay, a wonderful battle. Is there anything in the Hebrew that might give us a understanding of what might have happened here? So let's look at the words. This is verse 22. And the word that jumps out to me is this word deployed themselves. In the King James, it says, spread themselves, that they spread themselves there. Again, that's quite an interesting difference. Let's open that up and look at the word natash. And natash means to leave, forsake, or permit. Well, wow, okay, that doesn't fit with either of the translations we saw. So are they permitting? Are they forsaking something? Are they leaving something? Um, Again, look at all the translations that were used in the Bible here in the NASB version, and it all looks like something is happening where people were abandoning, where they were casting away, they were ceasing from doing something, forsaking something, neglecting something. Let's see if we can pack that together with some of the other words that they forsook in this valley. Well, what kind of valley is this? Is this like a big open field and it's between some mountaintops, which is typically a better area for fighting in? That's how they fought their battles. They would meet in a field and take their sides and do battle. Let's look at the word valley and see if there's anything here. So we see that it's called a vale. It's the first easy type of understanding, and it's translated valley, vales, but it comes from this word called amok. And, in English, of course, we used the word run amok, and it made me think of that. And when I looked up the word here, it mentions something about being deep. Okay, valleys are supposedly deep between mountainsides, but it's just interesting that this is giving us an indication that there's something more about this terrain here, that it was deep. And let's see if that could possibly give us any clue as to what kind of battle may have occurred here. So the next word, we want to remember those, the word for um, being in um, a place where uh, they deployed themselves, or they forsook themselves in this deep land. They forsook something in this deep land. And what is the Rephaites? So let's take a look up this word. It comes from the word Rapha. And again, the first translation here is just that it's an area east of Jordan. Okay, that's nice, but where does it come from? So let's look into the root word here, and it comes from a word that means to sink or relax. Okay, so here we have a deep place, a place that's you're able to sink into, and it's a place that's they're being forsaken. So was this a marshy area? Was this an area that once they got into, that God caused them to sink and just be caught in this muck so that they couldn't get away? It doesn't seem like they would willfully go into that ahead of time, but this maybe gives us a little bit of an understanding of what the battlefield was like and maybe what God did there. And of course, here we now look at verse 23, where David inquired of Yahweh, and Yahweh gives him some instructions to come around behind them. And then it comes to this word. We saw here it's translated as balsam trees. We saw previously it was translated, um, I forget what kind of trees, mulberry trees. Okay, what kind of tree is this? What is this word? So let's unpack it here. It comes from the root word of baka, and it says a balsam tree, but it's like, okay, we really, do we know really what kind of tree it was? Mulberry, it has to do with weeping. It comes from the word baka, which means to weep, that this was a tree that had sap that came out of it that was a weepy type tree. And so this whole word is uncertain of derivation, but it has an understanding that there is some weeping going on here, that there was maybe a calamity that took place. And I just find it so interesting that this word is associated with what's about to take place here. So let's just take another verse here and go into verse 24. And here is where it gets really interesting, that God is giving them a sign to watch for. It said, when you hear the sound, and here again, the translation is very different. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, then quickly advance and go out, and Yahweh will strike the camp of the Philistines before you. Now, this is just incredible because trees have leaves, wind blows through the trees, and you can hear them rustling. So, the last version, King James Version that we looked at, said that there would be a stirring. You'll hear a sound of a going. Well, what is the sound of a going? Again, all these very obscure. And so let's just take a look at this a little bit. You'll notice here we have this Kativ, which is what is written, that these, what I'm highlighting here is what was actually written in the Jewish scrolls, but it is a word that no one knew. It is a word that has passed from understanding and usage, and they didn't quite know how to interpret it. So they went in and interpreted it here and wrote this in along next to it. And they put in that this means when you shall hear, when you will hear. And it says, let's look at this word of what they were trying to listen for. And it's H6807, and it's called a marching. Well, how are you going to hear a marching up in the trees? And this word for a marching comes from the uniform that was typically worn in those days, and it appeared that on their ankles, on their legs, they would wear these metal shields, these metal armor, and that there were chains on it so that when they would march, you could hear the chains rattling. And so this marching is really the sound of chains rattling in the tops of the trees, different from rustling of the leaves, different from the wind blowing through the leaves, something very distinctly noticeable that David and his men would instinctively hear this sound and know what it means and knew it was a sign from God. And so this is just really, really something. And so how did God do this, and what was it meant to do? Was it only meant to give instruction to David, or could it have been meant to be heard by the Philistines so that it would mimic a large army approaching them, instill fear in them, get them to run into a marshy area where they would sink down in? Remember, they're wearing metal on their legs, they're wearing chains on their legs, they're wearing heavy armor, not good for treading water, not good for treading in quicksand or muck. And maybe they ran in a certain direction that they just freaked out when they heard this sound coming, and they would be able to be advanced upon very quickly. This is very similar, if you remember the story of Gideon when he fought against the Philistines, that he took 300 men, he blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers with the lanterns inside, and God multiplied that and made it sound like a huge army, and those uh, the enemy just kind of went crazy and got all confused and ended up harming and killing their own selves. I wonder how this is working here, because it said that God would go out before them and strike the camp of the Philistines. So again, what did David have to participate in? How much involvement did David have with that? We don't have any indication. There's nothing from the battle that tells us what went on, but we do know that there's some just very, very interesting things here that give us some indication on how God may have fought for David and Israel and won this wonderful victory. And again, to God be all the glory. Look at how he works in ways that we don't understand and ways that we cannot see. And when we get to this last verse here, that, David did what God had commanded him. And here the words are still very ambiguous as to who drove back the Philistines and who went all the way there. And, how far did God conquer? How far did David then pick up and continue to fight? We don't know those things, but there's some strong indication here that, you know, God wrought a wonderful victory through miraculous means, and David just kind of went in with his men and cleaned up the pieces and clean up the mess, and was totally in awe of what God did. And so I hope you enjoy that. Again, I just marvel as I study and look at the majesty and the wonder of what God has done, and know that He can do those things and has done those things back then. There's no reason He can't work wonders and miracles in your life if you just step out in faith and call upon Him in your time of need. So God bless you, and thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye bye.